If you think fairy tales only end with a kiss and fireworks, wait until you hear what happened at a billionaire's wedding in Vancouver, because just before the bride said, "I do," 3 identical little girls walked down the aisle, and turned the entire celebration into a courtroom of truth. The crystal chandeliers inside the Fairmont ballroom shimmered like frozen stars. Outside, the harbor reflected the golden sunset, and guests in designer gowns sipped champagne that cost more than most Canadians' monthly rent. Cameras flashed as Daniel Whitmore, tech billionaire and one of Canada's youngest self-made moguls, stood at the altar in a tailored tuxedo worth more than a small car. Across from him stood Isabella Laurent, elegance wrapped in lace, the daughter of a political dynasty. It was the wedding of the year. No one noticed the side doors open. At first, guests thought the 3 little girls were part of the ceremony, maybe flower girls who'd missed their cue. They wore simple white dresses from a department store, slightly wrinkled, and identical pink cardigans. Their brown curls bounced as they walked hand in hand down the aisle. The music faltered. A violin screeched into silence. Behind them stood a woman in a modest navy dress, her hands trembling but her back straight. Daniel's face drained of color. The triplets stopped in front of him. The smallest one stepped forward, clutching an envelope with both hands. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. A collective gasp swept through the room like a winter wind off Lake Ontario. Isabella's bouquet slipped from her fingers. The woman behind the girl swallowed hard. Her name was Amelia Hart. 4 years ago, she had been a junior software engineer at Daniel's startup when it was nothing more than a rented basement office in Toronto. Back then, Daniel wasn't on magazine covers. He was ambitious, charming, exhausted, and very human. They had fallen in love during late nights debugging code and sharing cheap takeout. He had promised her forever. But when investors came, when money poured in, when interviews and headlines followed, he slowly disappeared into a world where Amelia no longer fit. By the time she discovered she was pregnant, with triplets, he had changed his number. She tried to reach him. Emails went unanswered. Lawyers dismissed her claims. "You're just looking for a payout," they said. So she raised the girls alone in a small townhouse in Surrey, working 2 jobs, sometimes skipping meals so her daughters could have new winter boots. She never told them their father didn't want them. She just said he was far away. But when she saw Daniel's engagement announcement on national television, something inside her broke, and strengthened at the same time. She didn't want money. She wanted truth. Back in the ballroom, Daniel's hands shook. "This is insane," he whispered. "Security." Amelia stepped forward. "Don't," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "They deserve better than that." Isabella looked between them, her face pale but composed. "Daniel," she said quietly, "what is this?" The smallest triplet held out the envelope again. "Mommy said you like facts," she said. "So we brought proof." Inside were certified DNA results from a reputable lab in Toronto. 99.99% probability of paternity. Silence filled the room heavier than the chandeliers above. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. His empire had been built on data, precision, control. And now, in front of cabinet ministers, CEOs, and media executives, his carefully curated life was cracking. Isabella bent down slowly until she was eye level with the girls. "What are your names?" she asked gently. "Sophie, Claire, and Emma," they answered in perfect unison. The innocence in their eyes sliced deeper than accusation ever could. Amelia finally let her fear show. "I'm not here to ruin your wedding," she said, though her voice trembled. "I'm here because they deserve to know their father. And you deserve to know who you're marrying." Daniel felt the weight of every late night he'd justified, every call he'd ignored. He remembered Amelia's laughter in that basement office. He remembered holding her hand and saying he'd never become one of those men who abandon responsibility for success. He had become exactly that. Isabella stood slowly. The room waited for anger, for drama, for security to escort them out. Instead, she turned to Daniel. "Is it true?" Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time that evening, he wasn't a billionaire. He was a man cornered by his own past. "Yes," he whispered. A murmur rippled through the guests. Isabella inhaled deeply. "Then this wedding can't continue. Not like this." Her father protested from the front row. Cameras started flashing again. Social media notifications were already exploding. But Isabella held up her hand. Marriage is built on trust. And today, I learned I don't have it. She turned to Amelia. You were brave to come. Amelia hadn't expected kindness. It made her knees weak. Daniel stepped down from the altar, the polished image of perfection collapsing with every step. He knelt in front of the girls, his voice breaking. I didn't know, he said, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. He had suspected. He had chosen not to confirm. You look like us, Sophie said simply. That shattered him. In that moment, the ballroom no longer mattered. The stock prices, the headlines, the embarrassment, none of it compared to three small faces waiting for him to choose who he wanted to be. I'm so sorry, he said, tears falling freely now. I should have looked for you. I should have been there. Amelia watched carefully. She had rehearsed anger for years. But seeing him crumble, seeing genuine regret, stirred something complicated inside her. Sorry doesn't fix birthdays you missed, she said softly. It doesn't fix school plays with an empty chair. I know, he said. But let me try. The wedding guests began quietly filing out. What was supposed to be a spectacle of wealth had transformed into something raw and painfully real. Isabella approached Daniel one last time. I hope you become the father they need, she said. Because if you can't honor a promise to children, you can't honor one to a wife. She walked away with dignity, her veil trailing behind her like the closing chapter of a different story. Months later, the headlines faded. The scandal lost its sparkle. But something else began quietly. Daniel set up a trust fund for the girls, not as hush money, but as commitment. More importantly, he showed up. Awkward at first, learning how to braid hair by watching YouTube tutorials. Sitting in tiny chairs at parent-teacher meetings in Surrey. Missing board meetings to attend dance recitals. Amelia didn't forgive him overnight. Trust rebuilt slowly, like a Canadian winter thawing into spring. But she allowed him space to prove himself, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. One snowy evening in Stanley Park, the five of them built a lopsided snowman together. The girls laughed as Daniel struggled to roll the heavy snowball, completely unprepared for real winter work. For the first time, he wasn't building an empire. He was building a family. And if you ever doubt that truth has power, remember this. Three little girls in simple white dresses walked into a room full of wealth and status, and reminded everyone that no fortune is greater than responsibility, no legacy stronger than honesty. Sometimes the real vow isn't spoken at the altar. Sometimes, it's whispered through tears when you finally decide to do the right thing.